What the ASR complex already shows us is that survivors do not enter narcissistic relationships as blank slates. We enter with pre existing vulnerabilities, an ASR1 that already holds uncontained emptiness and invisible wounds, an ASR2 that is shaky or underdeveloped, and an ASR3 that is either unstable, overactive, or insecure rather than protective and proportionate. That matters because narcissistic abuse does not create pathology from nothing. It attaches to what is already structurally vulnerable. This is where the narcissist psyche introduces something profoundly distorting: inverse mirrored reflexive apathy. Imra is not indifference. It is not coldness in the ordinary sense. It is a relational force that mirrors affect while stripping it of aliveness, meaning, and reciprocity. When exposed to it repeatedly, the survivor's nervous system does something devastatingly logical. It begins to bind inverse mirrored reflexive apathy to ASR1. In other words, the narcissist's deadened, apathetic, non receiving internal world becomes welded to the survivor's deepest void. ASR1, which is already held early uncontained nothingness, now becomes contaminated by the narcissist's psychic deadness. The void is no longer just absence, it becomes actively annihilating. This is why survivors report their emptiness during collapse, that it feels foreign, alien, and hostile, not merely sad or lonely. Projective identification accelerated this process. Through repeated relational exposure, the narcissist exports their disavowed affective deadness, shame, and aggression into the survivor. Identification with the aggressor follows, not as a conscious choice, but as a survival reflex. Speech patterns shift, thought rhythms entrain, emotional timing synchronizes. The survivor's right brain becomes colonized by the narcissists. This is where ASR3 becomes critically distorted. ASR3 is meant to be a proportional anticipatory protector, a reflex that activates in the presence of real threat and deactivates when safety returns. Under narcissistic influence, ASR3 is hijacked and reshaped. It becomes hypervigilant, self policing, and inwardly aggressive. The survivor begins to anticipate punishment, withdrawal, or devaluation before it happens, not from the other, but from themselves. This is why survivors begin to censor their own needs, instincts, and perceptions. ASR3 no longer protects the self, it polices it. At the same time, devaluation performs a quiet but cumulative erasure of the survivor's internal object world. Each act of dismissal, contradiction, withdrawal, or contempt weakens the internal representation of the self as worthy, coherent, or real. The survivor does not let go of the narcissist. Instead, they hold tighter to the idealized image of who they believe themselves to be in the narcissist's gaze. Hope becomes pathological. Self esteem degrades not because the survivor suddenly believes they are worthless, but because the only remaining source of value is tied to a fantasy that cannot be relinquished without collapse. As the relationship drags on, ASR2, already unstable, begins to fail. ASR2 is meant to regulate identity across time. It allows the self to anticipate rupture without disintegration, to experience conflict without annihilation. Under sustained narcissistic stress, ASR2 capitulates. Every moment of discord becomes catastrophic. The future collapses into threat. Identity loses continuity. When this happens, collapse induced psychotic regression, CIPR, is triggered. ASR1 surges in intensity as annihilation anxiety floods the system. ASR2 loses its grip on coherent self identity. ASR3 expands uncontrollably, attempting to dominate the entire psyche through hypervigilance, internal attack, and compulsive meaning making. This is not madness, it is a nervous system overwhelmed beyond its regulatory capacity. The survivor does not lose themselves because they were weak. They lose themselves because their anticipatory systems were progressively dismantled, inverted, and colonized by a psyche that could not tolerate aliveness and therefore extinguished it in the other. Input shows us something crucial here. Narcissistic abuse does not primarily destroy through cruelty, it destroys through structural inversion. By attaching deadness to emptiness, fear to anticipation, and control to protection. Recovery, therefore, is not about reclaiming confidence or self belief. It is about untangling what was never yours from what always was, separating IMRA from ASR1, restoring ASR2's temporal authority, and right sizing ASR3 back into a protector rather than a persecutor. This is why the work is slow. This is why it feels like rebuilding from nothing. And this is why understanding the internal object world is not optional. It is where the relationship actually happened. What collapsed was not your strength, it was your anticipatory architecture. And that is something that can be rebuilt deliberately, ethically, and in reality. Peace out. Loads of love.